his disciples, saying, "Take all of you and drink of this. For this is my body."
Hi, this is Pastor Tom Countryman, and I'd like to welcome you to this broadcast of the worship service from the Portage United Methodist Church. The music and the sermon were recorded on January 1st, 2017. The Word became flesh and dwelled among us, and we beheld his glory, glory as of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth. John, the one called the Baptist, bore witness of him and cried out, saying, "This is he of whom I spoke, saying, He who comes after me is above me, because he existed before me." Of his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth were realized through Jesus Christ. No one has beheld God at any time. The only begotten God, who is in the bosom of the Father, has explained him.
Well, I'm all grown up now, and still need help somehow. I'm not a child, but my heart still can dream. So here's my lifelong wish, my grown-up Christmas list. Not for myself, but for a world of me.
this thing that we say all the time, that God becomes a human being, Jesus Christ. But this was a problem. It still is for a lot of people today. There are a lot of people who have a problem with this idea, so there's a lot of religious groups that don't hold it, even if they acknowledge Jesus in some sense. So, like Jehovah's Witnesses do not believe that God became a human being. Mormons do not believe that God became a human being. They make a distinction. They say that, something else. Jesus was not God, but somehow whatever Son of God means, it doesn't mean God. And we see that in the earliest writings of the church. We can see that this conflict is going on. Now, those who were Jewish, like Jesus, his fellow Jews, they did not have any problem with the fact that he was a human being. They were totally cool with that. Their struggle was the idea of him being divine, of him being God. And so we're going to see later on in the Gospel of John these encounters where things like Jesus says, "Why do you want to stone me? Because I did good works? Not because of the works that you have done," they cry back at him, "but because you, being merely a mortal, make yourself out equal to God." So they understood the implication of what was going on, and they didn't like it. They didn't like that piece. They were okay with the part about him being human, but they didn't like the part about him being divine. The flip is true in the Gentile world. The Gentile world was generally more comfortable with the idea that he was God, but they were uncomfortable with this humanity piece. And so there's an emphasis on that aspect in, like, say, some of the letters. John's letter says, "Any spirit that does not confess that Jesus has come in the flesh is not from God." Paul, writing in Colossians, says that the fullness of deity dwells in bodily form. So there's this tension that exists. People had trouble with it. Either the idea that God would have contact with human, that God would, it was really, that's what it came down to, was what is God dealing with body, with humanity? Humanity is unclean fundamentally on some broken level, and what is God? There should be a separation. And so both the Greeks and the Jews had that problem. There should be a separation, and they just tended to fall on different sides of the equation when they were engaged with this Christians proclaiming this doctrine. And these tensions exist and have for centuries. There was like 2-3 centuries of arguing in the church about trying to refine this down and what this meant. We're trying to shave the hair as close as possible to figure this one out, but it was a big deal. I think that John, though, actually in this passage tells us why. I think John actually explains it really clearly. John says, "No one has beheld God at any time." Now you have to understand that the word to see or to behold is always more than just visual. It's not about seeing. To behold is also to understand, to comprehend. It's a bigger concept. No one has ever understood God. No one has ever comprehended God at any time. No one has ever seen God at any time. But the only begotten God, who is in the bosom of the Father, has revealed to him. I think this is the clue to understand it. So bear with me. I'm doing doctrine now. I could be in my confirmation class with a chalkboard doing this. I have to start with a couple of assumptions, presuppositions, that I don't have time to go into. So I'm just starting with these two. They come from a quote from a movie called Rudy, which is a movie in the 80s. It's actually a pretty good film. There's a moment when Rudy is talking to the priest at Notre Dame University, and the priest says, "I've been a priest for 35 years, and I only know 2 things for certain." And these are my presuppositions that I'm working with. 2 things for certain. Number 1, there is a God. And number 2, I'm not him. Okay? So this is important, because obviously if there is no God, then everything else is, then this whole religious enterprise is a complete waste of time. And secondly, if I'm assuming there's only one God, right? Because if there's like a pantheon, then I'm in the wrong religion. I should be a pagan. So, one God. And number 2, I'm not him. Now that seems fairly obvious to me, but that is not so obvious to some people. Many cults, for example, not only in the modern world, but in the ancient world, were based on the idea that, no, really, you are God. You are God, or at the very least divine, sometimes with a small d instead of a capital D, but you're really God. And the problem is you just don't know that. And if you will come to our teacher has pierced the veil of confusion and misunderstanding and can reveal to you your God nature. And once your God nature is revealed, everything will be fine. Of course, in order to get there, you will need to sign over all of your possessions to the group. But that's okay, because what does God need possessions for anyway? So come on over, sign the contract right now. And this is actually true. You start digging around and looking at various cults, and you're going to find that that's fundamentally what's hiding underneath their idea, that you're really God, that you are God, or sometimes just divine, but it's pretty close. You're God. I'm going to go with, there is a God and I'm not him. Okay. Now here's what we're saying, is that we're saying as Christians, we say God exists, God is eternal, and God creates other. That there is no before God creates because there was no time, but if we were to speak from a temporal perspective, we would say that before there was creation, there was God. God was there first. That there was nothing but God, and God chose to create. So that everything exists because God created other. Now the characteristic of other is that it's not God. The universe is not God. The planet is not God. Human beings are not God. It does appear to be the case that we human beings have an innate desire to be in a relationship with God. We seek the divine connection, but we are not God. So, if that's true, riddle me this. How can you know God? Now think about this. I have a dog. People who are cat people were a little bit offended that I did not speak about cats at 8 o'clock service. But I can't. I'm not a cat person. All I can say is what I've observed and what I've been told. Namely, dogs have owners, cats have servants. I like cats. I'm just allergic to them, so I can't have a cat. So I have a dog. Now, here's the thing. There's a lot of stuff about a dog that I think I kind of get, right? I mean, when I give a dog something tasty, that wasn't... Oh, that was you. That was you. When I give a dog something tasty, my dog enjoys eating it, I can tell. And she's very happy. It's also quite entertaining to give her something disgusting. No, really, have you ever noticed it? Dog eats something disgusting, goes, this is terrible, spits it out, sniffs it, licks it, and then tries again, just in case it changed, it got better in the meantime. And that's exactly what human beings do. Have you ever noticed? Human beings go, that's awful. It's still awful, right? Nobody ever takes one bite, you always take two, just in case the second one, something changed. So there are some things about dog that I understand, because we have some stuff in common. We're both mammals, we've got brains, nervous systems that work the same way, we have similar emotional responses to certain kinds of things, we have taste buds, there are things we enjoy, pleasure, and things we don't like. But there are some things I will never understand. For example, I do not spin in a circle before I lie down in my bed. Yeah. What is that about? There's just no way to explain it. So even if we could talk to the animals, and it's actually remarkably possible. There's some parrots that have vocabularies of 1,000 words and can carry on conversations, monkeys who learn sign language and carry on conversations. There are whole aspects that are impossible to communicate. There's something in the dog experience which is not accessible to human language because we have no words for it. Now, here's what's interesting about that is that there are actually things in our human experience for which we have no words. Right? The Bible talks about this. It says that the Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we do not know how to pray as we ought. But the Spirit prays with us in groanings too deep for words. So sometimes there are things in the human experience for which we do not have words, for which there are no words possible. Now, there are just things that we don't have words for, and they're creating them. There's apparently a new word, which I cannot pronounce, but it's the smell of the air after the rain. There's a word for it now that was invented. It's kind of got a lot of syllables, and it was weird. But there's a word. But there's stuff in the human experience for which there are no words. But how much more the dog experience? There's stuff which we as human beings could never understand because we don't share that quality in common. We don't share dogness in common with the dog. So there's a place of there's some understanding, but then we run into a place where there's no more understanding. Now I just want you to think about this for a minute. The word God, what does that mean? Do you understand? It doesn't mean anything. It's a placeholder. Because the truth is, there is no words that you can use to describe God. We try. We have our theological language, but our theological language doesn't really say anything. It kind of points us in a direction, but it doesn't really say anything concrete. It's like the word God. The word God doesn't tell me anything. It's just a reference. It's a way of talking about something that I can't say anything about. I can't say anything about God. Why? Because God is the creator, but I'm the creature. God is eternal, and I'm not. God has no beginning, no end. I have a beginning. If I'm immortal, I have no end, but I still have a beginning. So there's not the same thing. Those are not the same. I am finite. God is infinite. You know what infinite means? Everyone thinks that infinite means really big. It does not. It means not finite. That's literally what the word infinite means, not finite. So here's what that means when we talk about God. It means that words like big, or small for that matter, do not apply. That the words simply don't apply. So if we say something like God is love, what do we mean by that? I mean, let's just imagine that there's some kind of parallel equation between human love and divine love. But divine love would be eternal and whatever other qualities and attributes, all-powerful love, we don't have the right words for it, uncreated love, just love. How does our word love even speak about that? What word do we have that can speak a truth about God? And once language fails us, and we realize that we simply don't have anything in common with God because we're created, not creator, suddenly we're left in a quandary, like how in the world can we know God? So we've got on the one hand this desire to know God, but on the other hand, no way to know God. How do we know each other? This is how we know each other. We know each other because we're human, right? So like if you're angry about something, I don't necessarily know exactly what your experience of anger is like, but I know what angry means because I've been there. So my common experience with your common experience becomes the vehicle by which we understand each other. Right? We share humanity in common, and it is that common humanity that allows us to be in relationships and to know one another. There's always a limit, obviously, because, like those of you who've been married for a long time know you are married to an alien. And there's always some aspect you will never comprehend. But we're able to have a relationship, imperfect though it is, we're able to have a relationship because we share in common our common humanity, a common language, common culture, common experiences. What do we have in common with God? Nothing, unless God chooses to create the common ground with us. So no one has beheld God, no one has understood God, no one has comprehended God at any time. But the only begotten God, who is in the bosom of the Father, has made him known. See, God, by becoming a human being, God takes on the common ground, becomes one with us, one of us. On the cross, Jesus comes to share all of human suffering and struggle, identifying even more deeply with us. So suddenly, we have something in common with God. We have our humanity in common with God. So now when I say God is love, I'm saying something real. Because whatever God's divine love is, beyond any human language, God's divine love is manifest through the human being Jesus Christ. God become human, and so now human love becomes part of the language of God's love. And I can say God is love, and I can understand that in a human sense and be accurate. Not complete, but accurate. Because God in Jesus Christ has made human love divine. It's become part of God's love, how God loves, one of the ways God loves. In the flesh of Jesus, God is now knowable. And that means that God is knowable in my flesh, in your flesh. In the flesh of those who are beloved to me, in the flesh of those I count as least. This is why Jesus says, whatever you do to the least of these, you do to me. This is what makes it possible. Salvation, knowing God is only possible to. So let me be clear about this. Knowing God is only possible if God has created the common ground of humanity with us. And that means that if I'm going to know God, then either God has to have done this already or needs to get on it really quick. Now, here's why this is important to me. This is why I'm a Christian and not something else. Do you understand? This is the thing. My experience that says God, there is a God, that I'm not him, and that I have a desire to know God, forces me to the conclusion that there must be an incarnation for that to finally come to pass. And what is it Christianity has struggled with and argued and held to across the centuries, even though it's difficult? We say God has become a human being. God has become a human being. And because of this, because of Jesus Christ, we can know God finally. I long to know you, O God. But what even does the word God mean? Isn't it just a placeholder, a term to refer to one who is beyond words or description? So if I am to know you, there must be a shared experience, a common reality by which I can grasp who you are. And this is why I believe in Jesus. Inasmuch as you become human and make yourself like me, you become knowable to me. Lord Jesus Christ, God incarnate, God become human, now I can know you in flesh and blood. In the flesh and blood of your incarnation, in the flesh and blood of my neighbor, in the flesh and blood of those most precious to me, and in the flesh and blood of those I regard as the least important. This is the hope on which I stand, the solid rock on which I build my faith. Amen. Mary had a baby, my Lord. Mary had a baby, oh my Lord. Mary had a baby, my Lord. The people keep a-coming, but the train done gone. Gone, gone, the train done gone. Gone, gone, the train done gone. Mary had a baby, my Lord. The people keep a-coming, but the train done gone. He healed the suffering, my Lord. He healed the suffering, oh my Lord. He healed the suffering, my Lord. The people keep a-coming, but the train done gone. Gone, gone, the train done gone. Gone, gone, the train done gone. Oh, Mary had a baby, my Lord. People keep a-coming, but the train done gone. He died to save us, my Lord. He died to save us, oh my Lord. He died to save us, my Lord. The people keep a-coming, but the train done gone. Gone, gone, the train done gone. Gone, gone, the train done gone. Oh, Mary had a baby, my Lord. People keep a-coming, but the train done gone.
Thank you for joining us in this broadcast of our worship service this morning. It was produced and edited by Tyler Francis. Opening music, Away in a Manger, was performed by the 915 Band. The song Grown Up Christmas List was performed by Mike Powers. The song Prayer on Christmas was performed by Connor Steck, Carl Johnson, and myself. And the closing song, the traditional spiritual Train Done Gone, also known as Mary Had a Baby,
was performed by the 915 Band. I'm Reverend Tom Countryman, inviting you to join us sometime for worship at Portage United Methodist Church. God bless.